Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Chris Scuderi, and over the last year, I've had the pleasure of chairing the FAFP's COVID-19 task force. It's hard to believe it's been more than a year since the first case of COVID-19 was diagnosed in the United States. The past year has transformed nearly every aspect of our world seemingly overnight. Meanwhile, our friends, family, colleagues, and communities have had their lives change in critical ways that promise to have much longer lasting effects. Living through a global pandemic has driven dramatic shifts in our jobs, eating habits, childcare, and even our collective sense of time. Tonight's presentation, Telemedicine 2021, Beyond the Basics, is our second webinar on the FAFP COVID-19 webinar series for 2021. This evening's webinar represents the 15th installment of programming organized and presented to support Florida's family physicians and their staff in dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. There is no doubt telemedicine is here to stay. The way in which healthcare is delivered has seen a shift during the COVID-19 pandemic. Telemedicine has served an essential role in treating patients during this difficult time. The continued availability and promotion of telemedicine services has played a prominent role in increasing access to service during the COVID-19 public health emergency. Tonight's presentation will feature 3 national experts in telemedicine that will provide us with an update on expanded access, improved reimbursement, policies in place, and ongoing acceptability by patients and healthcare providers. Please join me in welcoming our speakers. First of which is Dr. Julia Jenkins. And Dr. Jenkins is familiar to you all. She started the COVID-19 webinars about a year ago, and so excited to have her back. She's an academic family physician teaching at the USF Family Medicine Residency Program, Clearwater, where she co-created and currently facilitates a longitudinal telemedicine curriculum. Dr. Jenkins also currently serves as the vice chair of the FAFP CBD committee. Our second presenter is Dr. Maya Finkelston. Dr. Finkelston currently serves as senior medical director at Amwell Medical Group. Dr. Finkelston has been practicing telemedicine with Amwell for almost 9 years and has close to 30,000 patient visits so far, and she's been a great advocate of FAFP last year during everyone's jump to telemedicine. And last but certainly not least is Dr. Joey Nichols. Dr. Nichols is the founder of Canopy Family Care in Tacoma Park, Maryland, an innovative telemedicine-based primary care practice. Dr. Nichols was also the first ever primary care innovation fellow for the American Academy of Family Physicians. So as you can tell, we have an accomplished panel to lead tonight's webinar. The FAFP designates this live activity for a maximum of 1 AMA Category 1 credit. To claim credits, please complete and submit the activity evaluation. The evaluation link will be emailed after this webinar. Only FAFP members will be eligible to receive credit for this webinar. Before we begin, remember that similar to all FAFP webinars, participants will be in listen-only mode. You can type questions in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen that your presenter and I can see. We will attempt to answer your questions either during or at the end of the presentation. Okay, let's get started with tonight's presentation. Dr. Jenkins, Finkelston, and Nichols, welcome.
Thank you so much, Chris. I just wanted to say before I get started that it is such an amazing panel. I'm going to intentionally talk fast and try to get through my slides because my purpose is really just an introduction. We're going to hear some amazing speakers, and then I think the most valuable part of this webinar is going to be the Q&A at the end. I'm really interested to see what kind of questions you guys have. So next slide. I have nothing to disclose. Next slide. Okay, thank you. So it's been about a year. So believe it or not, March 2020 is when we had the CARES Act in response to the pandemic, and we had this 1135 waiver. And telemedicine was here, you know, all of a sudden. I mean, it's been here a long time, but it wasn't a reality for most of us practicing in busy family medicine offices. But it allowed us in a very practical and wonderful way to connect with our patients safely. And I think a lot of us have come to appreciate the value after being kind of immersed in it very quickly. Next slide. So as Chris was saying, you know, the FAFP really wanted to help their members get on board very quickly. They created a very good bank of resources, and we've done 2 telemedicine webinars. We're not going to cover basics here because that was done pretty thoroughly in the prior webinars, but those are definitely still available. Next slide. So recently there was an article published in Health Affairs. I'm going to break down this kind of busy slide for you, but basically this was looking at our telemedicine utilization just prior to March when the pandemic started and just after March. And this was a pretty sizable study. They looked at 16.5 million patients that were commercial and Medicare Advantage patients. And they were just trying to see, they measured a few things What you can see by the circles is the percentage of telemedicine by specialty. So as you would anticipate, primary care kind of dominated in the telehealth world immediately after the pandemic. On the left side, you can see how the pandemic affected our number of visits. So we, in the months preceding March, when we first started dealing with the pandemic, we saw a decrease in about 30 to 40% of our total number of patient visits. Sorry, I'm hearing an echo. And the top part of this slide is showing what percentage of our visits after the pandemic started were delivered via telemedicine, whether that's video or audio. So we were doing about 30 to 40% telemedicine after March. And you can see how it affected the other specialties, but we were doing quite a sizable amount of telemedicine. Next slide. So, a lot of us now have experienced telemedicine and have a lot of lessons learned in that. When I talk to physicians about their telemedicine experiences, there was initially a lot of debate about how to optimally schedule these visits. People have found it very helpful to kind of bundle them together when possible for efficiency purposes and as far as making sure the technology is working and everything. It's been very valuable in our practice to have our MAs and clinical staff connect with the patient before the visit, and this allows them to do a med reconciliation, also allows them to gather vitals like blood pressure and blood sugar readings and their weight. It also kind of helps triage and helps identify any potential technical issues. Also, they may determine when they call that it really needs to be done in person. And then a lot of us have learned how to optimize our technology. A lot of us went and got nicer webcams and better lighting because we have to find ways to connect with our patients in a meaningful way without actually being in the room. So good lighting and being able to hear us and looking professional helps engender that relationship and that trust that they have in us. I'm sure several of you have stories like I do of patient privacy issues and safety issues. I've had to tell a few patients to pull over when they're driving their car and connecting with me to do a telemedicine visit. Also patients that maybe had friends or other people in the room where I had to make sure that they were comfortable discussing their protected health information with everybody that was off screen. What's been nice this year is with some of the billing changes, I think some physicians, when I spoke with them, were intimidated about documenting physical exam and some of the elements to meet the requirements for a level 4 and certain levels of billing. That has gotten easier now that we're billing more based on complexity and not necessarily checklists, but definitely we've had to kind of keep up with reimbursement, and we're going to talk more about that as things continue to change. Next slide. So a lot of you are probably wondering, now that we've been made this part of our practice and we're seeing how invaluable this can be in certain situations, what's going to happen once the pandemic is over? Isn't that nice to think about once the pandemic is over? Next slide. So unfortunately, for those of us that really understand the value in telemedicine, CMS came out with their 2021 physician fee schedule. They did make some permanent changes to include more telehealth services than they had before. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But unfortunately, the way that we're practicing telemedicine now during the pandemic, they did not include language to reimburse for those type of services. And that includes our video follow-up visits and our audio only visits, which helps our geriatric patients and others. Next slide. Okay. So just to kind of simplify this, they made permanent changes, which includes remote patient monitoring, and CMS and other payers are definitely seeing the value in remote patient monitoring, and we're going to talk more about that. They also cover home visits, but only simple home visits for established patients, and I'll touch on that a little. But they're only going to cover other types of services on a temporary basis, either just during the pandemic or until the end of the year. CMS has also said that they are going to endorse researching the cost benefit of doing telehealth visits and use that research to kind of determine their future reimbursement changes. Next slide. So just briefly, some of you may be wondering, haven't we been doing telemedicine home visits because our patients are at home? But the definition, if you're going to bill for a telemedicine home visit, is a different CPT code. And it basically means that your patient, for one reason or another, can't come to your office. And so they don't have to be homebound, but it might be a patient with severe rheumatoid arthritis who's having a flare, and mobility would be an issue, or a patient that had a high fall risk that couldn't make it to your office. So if you're going to bill for this type of visit, it's very important that you document why they can't do a traditional visit. And you can see that CMS is only reimbursing for the low complexity type remote home visits. And you can get more information about how to do a good home visit in the AFP journal. Next slide. The thing that has really taken off in the world of telehealth is remote patient monitoring or remote physiologic monitoring. So the reason for that is a lot of the patients, now that we're seeing an expanded geriatric population and more complex issues, they're seeing the value in this, especially with the pandemic, with decreased hospitalizations and lower costs for patients. And it really does help to expand our connection with our patients and be able to monitor them in a very meaningful way. So there is a lot of companies that are partnering and expanding and starting to offer various remote patient monitoring services to look at various physiological vital signs and different parameters. For example, the Apple is partnering with a company called Biogen. They're trying to develop a wearable device that will look for early signs of cognitive impairment for our dementia patients. So there's a lot of innovation happening with this particular type of telehealth. Next slide. So in order to bill for this, there is some criteria that I'll briefly discuss. So it does have to, the device you're using has to meet a certain medical definition as outlined by legislation. And you can't just have the patient self-reporting. It has to automatically upload that data and ideally connect to some kind of dashboard or to your electronic medical record. It has to either do this on a daily basis, or you have physician or provider set parameters that the patient is alerted to. Next slide. And what is considered a type of remote patient monitoring but is billed separately is something called continuous glucose monitoring. And this is something we've been using here at the residency. The two companies that you're seeing here is called Dexcom and Freestyle Libre. A lot of endocrinologists are also embracing this, and it can be a very valuable tool in helping your patients with diabetes have alerts and help to manage their disease state. I will tell you that I just got in my mailbox a week ago a very nice article on this, on how to incorporate this in your practice and how to bill for this in the Family Practice Management Journal. So if you want to learn more about how to do that, you can kind of reference the journal. Next slide. And then I just wanted to briefly mention, again, when patients self-report their blood pressure, you can bill for that. But that is not considered remote patient monitoring because it's not automatically uploaded, but that is an option. Next slide. In the prior webinars, we talked about virtual check-in codes. And the reason I wanted to mention this is because CMS did not include language for reimbursing phone calls and audio-only visits. This is probably going to be the new way to bill for those types of services, because this can be a phone call. Previously, the virtual check-in code was the 2021, which was a very brief communication with your patient, dealing with something that needed to have a conversation, but not necessarily an in-person visit. They did add 2 codes so that other types of healthcare professionals could bill for a virtual check-in. And they also added a code so that if you had a longer phone conversation that was 11 to 20 minutes in length, you could also bill for that. Next slide. So for those of you who are wondering, now that we've been doing video follow-up visits and we've been doing our wellness visits remotely and we've been doing our transitional care visits after the hospital via telemedicine, and we've come to see how valuable that type of service can be, are we going to be able to keep doing that? Is this something that we're going to be able to continue? So we'll talk a little bit about that. Next slide. So there are several pieces of legislation nationally currently in the House and Senate that are being debated and discussed to try and expand and preserve telemedicine as we've come to know it during the pandemic. So you can see the different pieces of legislation there. Next slide. And here in Florida, there is just a ton of telehealth bills, again, currently being debated in the House and Senate as it's in session right now. What I would encourage all of you to do is to look at the FAFP.org advocacy site, and please call your legislator if you have good stories about how telemedicine has helped your patients and your practice. Those personal stories really go a long way. It gives a visualization instead of the words on the page with these bills. So please share those stories and help us be able to preserve doing telemedicine. Next slide. And then I wanted to mention as well, Dr. Nichols, who you're going to be hearing from, him and I are chair and co-chair of the AAFP Telehealth Member Interest Group. There's a lot of fantastic physicians on there that can be really helpful when you have various questions about expanding telemedicine or telehealth in your practice. So just a really good resource that you can access through the membership website on the AAFP. Next slide. And in summary, so we can kind of get ahead to Dr. Mia, I would really encourage all of you to embrace telemedicine like you did this past year, especially the expansion of telehealth modalities like remote patient monitoring, because I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of that. Make sure you're advocating for us to continue to be able to do telemedicine and do it at parity, because we really should get paid for this type of care the same way we get paid for in-person care. I think all of us have been able to see that it's almost, if not equivocal, to what we can do in the office. I would also say to all of you, this really has made me appreciate being a family doctor more so, because we are the masters of triage and differential diagnoses, and we also know how to have meaningful connections with our patients despite pandemics and despite technology glitches. And so this is where we really shine with telemedicine. And so be proud of what you do. If you have any questions, we'll field those today, but I'd be happy to also answer questions via email. And that is it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Julia. That was fantastic. And I just agree so much with the vignettes that you presented. And I certainly hope that with the regulations and reimbursements that it's only onward and upward. I can't imagine us going backward in time. So let's hope not. But I'm hoping the future is bright, especially after 2021 with respect to that. So let's keep working on that. I too am very interested in the Q&A. I really enjoy questions, and I do want to set the stage and just give you a little bit of history about my personal journey into telemedicine, because I think it'll be useful for any questions you may have. I graduated, back in the 90s. So I have been practicing family medicine for many years. And I initially went into a city sort of large health system for my family practice experience right out the gate. And I really enjoyed that, had a family and decided, okay, it's time to move to raise those kids. And I started in a private practice in a very rural area, about an hour south of DC. So just to give a little setting, this area, people don't like to go out of the county for their medical care, and we don't have every specialty there. So you can imagine as a family doc, assuming a lot of responsibilities that I may not have been as comfortable with, but you learn to do that, right? We've been trained, and there are so many resources. But the point is that people didn't really want to leave the county for any care that they needed. They wanted to just get everything from me, and which was great. I enjoyed that. As we got busier and busier, and like many people back in the, I guess, late 90s, early 2000s, now we were not really making ends meet in my private practice. So we sold our practice to a larger group, and that was really a good thing. EMRs came in, and we absorbed that and embraced it. What can I say? But I did notice after that the practice flavor changed a bit. And where I really noticed it was with our geriatric population. I did start to coach high school sports. I really like coaching athletes. And so I would leave my office around 2:45, but I would start early. And I did notice that my geriatric patients who relied on their family members to bring them into the office were not coming anymore. And after a while, I realized that the front desk wasn't even giving me the messages. They were sending them to the emergency room, unfortunately. So at around the same time, I started hearing more about telemedicine. And so I went to our leadership medical director, our sort of regional medical director, had a meeting and suggested, hey, I'll be the guinea pig for telemedicine. I feel there's a need for this. I'm losing patients to the emergency room and they don't need to go there. I would like to do this. And they laughed at me. So, this is what, 10 years ago, but they did laugh at me. And here I am now, realizing, as you all are, what the just the value of providing care this way is. And so I had heard about American Well, or Amwell Medical Group, and I spoke with leadership and was really amazed. I love their vision, their vision for the future, their values, they had a commitment to quality of medical care. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to try this. Let's see what telemedicine is all about. And so I overlapped with my brick and mortar for a while, and then quickly realized, I'm all into telemedicine. I want to make this work, and I see the utility in this. And so at the time, just to give you perspective, there were only 13 states that allowed telemedicine at that time. And now, obviously, all states are allowing it, but it took a while. And I enjoyed talking to medical boards about, trying to convince them about the value in this. So there are a lot of stories there, which I won't get into, but here we are now, 9 years later, almost 30,000 visits. And it's just, as you all know, hopefully on the phone, on the connection here tonight, either you've already tried some telemedicine visits, whether it was before the pandemic or the pandemic forced your hand, or maybe you're thinking about it now because you see that, as people always say, the toothpaste is out of the tube. You've got to sort of jump on board. And I do want to address that, because I think that while every doctor should try to give their visits through telemedicine, it may not be for everyone, but you should try it and see how you can use it for your practice. And if you realize, hey, this is really not how I'm comfortable, that's fine. I also want to say that I think that it's such a wonderful way for providers who have had a lot of experience, and maybe those that are close to retirement, or even those who have retired, to come out of retirement and still use their gifts. We have a lot of providers within Amwell Medical Group who actually are retired, came out of retirement to offer care this way. And I think, not that someone who's right out of residency can't do this, that's not what I'm saying, but the experience just goes so far. And the reason why is because you know how to take history, you know how to look at a patient and really hear what they're saying. And it's just, I could go on about that. My mother, in fact, who is no longer alive, when I took this position with Amwell Medical Group, she's an endocrinologist. She was in retirement and would have loved to come back and seen her patients this way. So, keep that in mind. But so Julia asked me to be part of this to speak about some of the cases that make doctors nervous with providing care this way. And I work with our quality team very in depth. We do reviews on all of our providers because we want to maintain high quality of care. We want to make sure everyone is practicing antibiotic stewardship. We have guidelines to guide them in, the latest way and the best way and the evidence-based way to treat common diagnoses. But there are times that I get calls and say, Dr. Mia, how would you handle this? And Dr. Mia, I didn't feel comfortable doing this. Would you have done something differently? And so I just want to, I picked two examples that I think will resonate with everyone. The first is cough. So as we all know, and I don't want to, give you a way or a chapter on how to treat cough and what causes cough, but the most common things are, post-nasal drip, allergies, reactive airways, reflux, just to name a few. And of course, that cough that lingers after an upper respiratory infection. But a lot of doctors will say, well, the person put in on their intake form that they have a fever and a cough for a couple of weeks, and I feel like I should decline those visits. Well, first of all, you never want to decline without delivering that message face to face, because, tell the patient why you think they need more care or they need to be seen in person. But when you see someone with cough, I think it's so important to really see what they look like. It's easy to say I have a cough and I don't feel great. And then you see them and here they are dressed for work and they're in an office setting, versus the patient who has a cough that's been lasting for 2 to 3 weeks. And when the video connects, you see they're in bed. It's a dark room. Their eyes look tired. Their mouth looks dry. Maybe their color even looks bad. When they start to speak, they're coughing after a few words. So my point here is that your observational skills are going to offer you so much when that video connects. And you don't want to underestimate the benefit of that. It can really help you decide if this is someone that you feel comfortable treating online versus someone who you feel it has to be seen in person, whether that's urgently, emergently, or maybe the next day. So again, another nuance is you obviously let the patient give you their history of present illness. You listen. And then you ask a few questions. You get to the medical history. And this is something that I laugh at, but often people will say they won't fill in anything for me, that they have no medical history. And I'll say, well, do you see your doctor for any medical concerns or do you take any medications? Oh, no. And then because they're calling for a cough, I'll say, well, do you get seasonal allergies or year-round allergies? Oh, yeah. Yes, I do. Oh, yeah. My doctor gave me Montelukast to use as needed. And I'll be, okay, thanks. And what about asthma? Have you ever been told you had asthma, reactive airways disease? Have you ever been given an inhaler at any time in your life? Oh, yeah. I had asthma when I was younger, but I outgrew it, quote unquote, outgrew it, for those who can't see me. And then the third question I ask is, what about eczema? Do you ever get eczema? Oh, yeah. I get some of those dry skin patches in the winter, or some people say I get it in the summer. Well, that tells me a lot right there. Oh, and if they say no to those, I'll also ask, well, what about family history? Is there any family history of asthma, allergies, eczema, and smoking, of course, as well? And then those answers will give me some thought already as to, okay, what medicines could I potentially offer this patient to see if they'll improve with the symptoms they're presenting with. And then, I'll do a physical exam, and there are maneuvers that you can do, some deep breathing, forced expiration. Some people will have a peak flow meter. Some people have a pulse ox anymore, especially with the pandemic. People have gone out to buy pulse oxes. So all of that is helpful. Plus, you can just ask, hey, when you walk up and down the stairs, when you go to do your laundry, when you take the dog out for a walk, do these things make you cough? And anyway, with all of that, we can make, if you can't make a firm diagnosis, you can at least have a differential diagnosis. And, the bottom line to me is, if there is something a piece of information that I would want that I cannot get through a telemedicine visit, just like if I was in my brick and mortar, if I saw someone and I thought, shoot, I need a chest x-ray, I'm not going to treat them online, and I'm going to tell them why. And I'll say that to them. I'll say, you know what, I think this is what's going on, but if I saw you in my brick and mortar, this is what I would order. So I think you need to be seen in person, or if you don't have a primary, you need to go to the urgent care. And very rarely in my 9 years, I think maybe I've had 4 people I've had to send to an emergency department for some sort of respiratory distress. So, again, don't be nervous when you see some symptoms. Talk to the patient, see what they look like, ask them questions. You may be able to offer some medications and some advice that will at least carry them through a day or two. And then you can, give them those parameters and educate them. If you're not better with what I'm suggesting, you should go in and see your primary care physician. Or if you don't have one, you should go to the urgent care. And that is another thing I meant to bring up earlier, the education piece. I feel that I can do so much more education when people come in for a telemedicine visit than I could in my brick and mortar, because they are coming in typically for one issue. Whereas when you're in the brick and mortar, and we've all been there, when someone comes in for their yearly physical and they have a list of, let's say, 5 or 6 things they want to talk about, rightly so, but your attention is a little divided there in most cases. And here you can really focus on educating them about, all these issues that could contribute to their cough, for the example that I gave you. The other thing or the other diagnosis that is another common source of anxiety for our providers is abdominal pain. And when I educate and mentor providers, I try to say, when someone comes in with abdominal pain, the first thing I'm thinking of are really 2 buckets. Is it surgical or isn't it surgical? That's it. And you can rule that out pretty quickly. We all know the history, so I don't have to go into those details, but you can get very creative with, even the surgical piece. Let's say you think someone is talking about a hot appendix, or maybe it's not a hot appendix, but you're wondering about that. Same with gallbladder disease. And I always ask these patients, now, I realize there's a difference here. When I see a patient, because I'm with a large medical group, and we're doing urgent care, I may not have a relationship with them. You all have that luxury of having a relationship, and you can know their past history. You can maybe even have reference to recent blood work, or you can bring them into the office in a day or two, which is what we try to advise our patients in doing, and looping in that primary care physician, because we don't want to replace that by any means. We want to augment the care. But when we don't have that ability, again, it's an education point, and saying, it's better to do these things non-emergently, right? So let's pay attention to these symptoms. And for instance, gallbladder disease, you can really get a good history from people and say to them, hey, it sounds like your gallbladder is trying to tell you something here. So let me have you try to avoid these things until you get in with your doctor. Or if you don't have a doctor, I think that this is how we're going to get you in with one, and give them those options. And then certainly if you have analyzed that it's not a surgical problem, usually you can give recommendations on supportive care very safely online, and also review those sort of red flags of, hey, if it's getting worse and this is what happens, you definitely need to be seen in person. I do want to those are my 2 vignettes, but I also do want to add in there one last thing, that we are starting to do virtual primary care, which I know can make some people nervous, but I do want to say that it's so rewarding for me to do it again. I have a few patients now who I've seen multiple times. It does take some organization and workflow within our company to be able to follow up on getting blood work, to follow up on referrals. And we have a really nice system in process right now for us. It's going to happen. And I really think that this is a wonderful way for telemedicine to make a difference in all of our brick and mortar lives, with sort of that first entry into your medical care to be a virtual visit, and get acquainted that way, and then go in when you definitely need hands-on visits, you need studies, you need further diagnostic testing, and you need a hands-on exam. We're not trying to replace that, but it's really an exciting time, and I really welcome any questions. Thank you.
All right, I guess I'm up. Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Joey. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm here to talk to you about boosting your professional satisfaction in 90 days. It's an audacious claim, but we'll see what we can do with that. I don't really have anything to disclose. Could I have the next slide, please? I keep pushing the button like I'm advancing the slides, but I'm not. I grew up in the Baptist church where we tell you what we're going to tell you, we tell it to you, and then we tell you what we just told you. So we're going to look at these things. Moving on. So what's really the point of it all, right? The big take-home point that I want to emphasize to all of you is that you can have a practice that is personally satisfying. That's a worthy goal. However, decades of healthcare reform and the atomization of medical care into balkanized subspecialties, and all of the boogeymen that we face around reimbursement and electronic health records. I mean, these are real concerns, but it's safe to say even before the pandemic times, we were fairly beleaguered as a specialty, right? And it's been encouraging in my relatively short practice lifetime to see this emphasis on well-being, on the not just the avoidance of burnout, but maybe we can use our practices. Maybe we can design situations for ourselves that help us to thrive in the world, right? And we can work as a part of that. And so if you look at like the science behind what does it mean to have well-being, something like half of that is purely genetically determined. You're not going to modify that. You're just kind of born that way, right? There's another piece of this which expands and contracts, circumstances, stuff outside your control that just happens to you, like a pandemic, for instance, has a major influence on well-being. It can be up to 40%, but it can be as little as 10. Meanwhile, the things that you can do something about, they live in 4 buckets. That's your faith, who your family are, what friends that you spend your time with, those relationships, those loving, supportive relationships that you invest in, and then there's work, right? Which is what we're really talking about today. What are those factors at work, those habits around work and your approach to it, the things that you spend your time on in order to find professional meaning, can really be an important source of promoting your well-being overall. So moving on. And a lot's been written about professional satisfaction. You've probably seen the Harvard Business Review articles. There's a whole book by Daniel Pink, the psychologist, around the importance of autonomy, mastery, and purpose is one way to think about this. And we can square this against Arthur Brooks' framework from the previous slide, and kind of consider those factors that to physicians really seem to be important, right? So it's about who controls my schedule, what tools do I have to use? Do I hate my EHR? Do I get to alter the workflow within it so that I can get through my day more easily, or am I stuck with what the informaticists give to me to use? Am I able to exercise professional judgment? Do I feel like there are quality improvement people breathing down my neck and scrutinizing every decision, or do I feel like there are people there to help me to be a better doctor, right? There's this concept of mastery. Any success that you have, do you feel like you earned that success? Do you have a feeling like I invested myself in this effort and I've grown my practice and things are getting better because I've worked harder? Or do you just kind of feel like you're on that hamster wheel and you've got visits scheduled every 15 minutes and you're just adding up the 99214s and what's really the point of it all? Because you have 10 years experience, but it's the same year over and over and over again is different than having 10 years of growth, right? And then lastly, there's that concept of purpose, that ability to feel like you're serving others in a way that just kind of resonates with your own personal values is something that, oh, my video hasn't been on. Hello, yeah, is something that many of us are looking for. But I got to hide it from myself. That's an important telemedicine pro tip, is to hide your own video of yourself. Otherwise, you will stare obsessively at yourself and it really burns you out. Could I have the next slide, please? So there's this wonderful report that came out. The AMA and RAND partnered together on a series of reports written by this guy, Mark Friedberg, and his research team, who are kind of the experts in studying what makes health professionals, physicians satisfied, right? And the subtitle of this report really ought to be all of the ways that EHRs are evil and destroy professional satisfaction. That was their major finding, is that a lot of us hate them. They haven't improved much since this rate came out. Since I started in telemedicine, I don't really use an EHR, which is kind of fun because a lot of the companies, we have their own proprietary ways of record keeping. I have my own that I've developed in my own practice. So, that's the easy part to break free of if you really lean into telemedicine. But you might be looking for other opportunities to improve the quality of care that you're providing, have more autonomy, have more control over your work. You may want to escape an environment where there was little collegiality, little fairness, little respect. You may want to create your own thing. And it used to seem really intimidating to start a practice. But now with things going online, the point I want to make to you is that it's fairly simple. Now, I do believe in parity as far as payment. I didn't used to. I used to think it was silly because what are you talking about? I'm just going to be a telemedicine doctor and talk to you on the video. It couldn't possibly be that complicated or expensive until I actually saw the legal bills that I was getting to navigate the complexities of starting a multi-state telemedicine practice. And I'm here to tell you there's a different set of expenses if you're going to be a telemedicine doctor than if you're going to be a brick and mortar doctor. It's not necessarily much less overhead. So there's a big justification for that parity. I mean, the reason to do this is not because you're going to save on practice overhead. Basically, the reason to think about switching to a telemedicine practice is because, again, there's this concept of satisfaction that you want to achieve through some of the control and the autonomy and the content of the work that you're just not getting where you currently are. So next slide, please. So this is some stuff from the RAND report. This is like a forest plot. Things toward the right are good things. Things toward the left are bad things. So, people are more satisfied when you like the benefits of your job, you feel like you're fairly compensated. When the things that I do on a daily basis seem to directly, measurably, positively impact how my practice is doing, if I like how much I'm paid, don't really tend to care all that actually much about my personal productivity. It's more to do with the feeling like, oh, I worked hard and I saw positive benefits accrue because of that work. And it's with the multiple middlemen and bureaucracy that healthcare has become in many settings, it can feel awfully difficult to see that connection between that really great job that you did with your patient, and then nobody but you and the patient knew about it. Like nobody noticed, and it has no seeming effect on your success professionally, your bottom line. It feels very lonely. And so having your own micro practice, as I do, where you're just totally responsible for the whole thing, also gives you that immediate gratification of knowing that I did a good job and those benefits are going to accrue directly to me and my patient. Next slide. So more good things, if your values are aligned with the practice, if you've got really great leaders in place, or if you're leading yourself around and you like your own leadership style and you're compassionate employer to yourself, the employee, it could be a good scene for you. That's all pretty self-explanatory. I think the next slide might just be the same thing, and that's my mistake. But maybe give me one more slide. So ultimately, the equation that determines our satisfaction is this ratio of what do you have versus what do you want? And so if you're somebody who has that Peloton bike in mind, and here's what you pick up on Craigslist instead. Meanwhile, if you're someone who's fine with the ergometer, old school, early 90s bike, and a Peloton arrives, you'll be pleasantly surprised, but really ultimately, it's a matter of balancing this ratio, right? Could I have the next slide? The reason I bring that up is because I think if you're thinking about making a major change in your practice, it's worth considering what is it that you're willing to give up. And there is this complex that many family physicians have. Maybe we had it's a personality thing, it's the way we're raised, it's the residency that we trained at, I'm not sure where it comes from, but that feeling that you have to be all things to all people and absolutely do everything, that concept of full scope. And I greatly admire people who make the decision to embrace that concept in their practice. It's not for everybody. And for a lot of us, there are things that we can give up. And most family physicians are less than full scope. It doesn't make us lesser family physicians. I was trained to believe that you become the family doctor that your community needs. Like your patients teach you the kind of doctor that you should be. And so as a telemedicine doctor, if you wanted to lean in that direction, it's worth thinking about, this important function, because if you're someone who just cannot give up certain aspects of your practice that by necessity have to be delivered in person, I don't expect you're going to be really satisfied with the telemedicine practice. But if you can find a way to really take inventory and examine all those things that aren't adding any value to your professional satisfaction, to your patient's health, to your personal life, how many of these things are not relevant to telehealth, right? And can you carve out for yourself a practice, a patient population, an approach to care that allows you to really hit that sweet spot where you can share your gifts with the world, take those things that you are good at and that the world needs, and make money doing them. And if you're right in that sweet spot, right in that pocket, that's the idea of basically I'm trying to propose to you of a telemedicine sort of micro practice. It's a great opportunity to build that for yourself in a relatively low risk way. And this is not something I would have recommended that anybody do a year ago, by the way. I think historic conditions are forming now that make this a new and exciting trend. So next step. But you don't have to jump in all at once, right? You can skim before you swim, before you dive. So what I would encourage all of you to do, as Julia and Mia have recommended, just start where you are. Are there ways that you can expand telemedicine in your current practice and get a sense of do I really hate this and it's horrible? Or maybe there's something here that I want to lean into a little bit more. And so you can go a little bit deeper by taking on maybe a part-time contractor or employee role. The great thing about telemedicine is that there's very, very few scenarios where it's restrictive covenants are not going to apply, right? I'm licensed in the state 1,500 miles away. Come on, people, right? So you have the opportunity to work. I work across 5 time zones on a daily basis, so you have an opportunity to have great geographic reach and a lot of variety in what you're seeing and who you're seeing and when you're seeing them. And then if that's appealing to you, if those initial experiences, are kind of exciting, you can decide at some point to dive in. You could take on a full-time role. I hear Amwell is hiring. You can also take this other direction that I'm here to speak a little bit more about. This idea of a solo telemedicine practice is finally viable, I think, from a financial and a regulatory standpoint. I've been doing it for about 4 weeks. So, we'll see how that pans out. Next slide, please. And the AAP is here to help. Right, so there's this great report that I was privileged to be a technical advisor on that was produced by the AAP and Managed Health early in the pandemic. It's this wonderful guide you can find online, Practice Transformation for Telehealth. But I actually used this guide building a practice from scratch, right? And I didn't really understand. I thought it was really curious that number 2 is right there at the beginning, right? Like check the licensing and legal requirements like came before all the rest of these things, because I'm somebody who gets excited about technology. I'm going to situate myself. The first iPhone what hit the market like 2 months before I started medical school. And I remember I had a story of being laughed at too. I remember holding that iPhone up as a third-year medical student, trying to help the second-year medical students at their orientation to prepare for rounds, like entering the clinics and leaving the basic sciences. And I held up my iPhone and I declared, this thing is going to change the way that we practice medicine. You're going to text your patients, you're going to text your family members, you got Facebook on there, you can stay connected with people that you don't see anymore because you're in the hospital all night long. You have this is a source of infinite wisdom because you can look things up on rounds and always have all the patient's information and all the textbooks right here in the palm of your hand. And everybody in my class, most of them, they laughed at me. Right? In 2009, you had a class full of medical students laughing at somebody waving an iPhone in their faces and saying, this is going to change the history of that. This is going to change the entire way that we practice medicine. So fast forward a few years, and here we are. I thought I'd have to spend the next day begging people for the next decade of my life, trying to get people enthusiastic about telehealth and to sort of see the potential here. And whoa, was I mistaken, because I got a lot of calls last March, like, hey, Joey, you still doing that telemedicine stuff? I got a couple of questions. Can you help me out? But yeah, little digression, talk to the lawyers first, right? Because before you get too obsessed with the technology, as I easily do, there's just a lot of stuff that won't work for fairly obvious reasons. And then the cheapest way to fail in a useful way is to spend a few $100s to try to explain it to a lawyer. And if you can't explain it to a lawyer, you probably shouldn't do it, and it's a bad idea. And that's a way less painful way to fail than put something out into the world and only to find out oops, that was a bad idea and illegal. So next step, just to kind of whet your appetite for how you would go through this. It's not a trivial thing to say, oh yeah, you can just start your practice tomorrow. It's a 3 to a 6 to a 9 month process, depending upon your state and how many licenses you already maybe have and your level of motivation. But there's a long list of things that you have to pay attention to, some of which apply to starting any practice, but some are really very particularly, kind of specific to a telemedicine practice. And there's a few lawyers I could point you in their directions. Nate is wonderful. He's too expensive for most of us, but if you're starting a company like Amwell size and you get a bunch of venture capital money, he'll be happy to help you out. But in the meantime, he and I could refer you to some people who are a little bit more affordable who can help you to answer all these questions you'd have to answer if you want to seriously look into this. And I would start here. If you make it past skim and swim and dive and you're ready to dive in, well, here's those first strokes that you have to take, right? These are those first questions that you have to answer. Could I have the next slide? Meanwhile, you have professional networks. Dr. Julia's mentioned the telemedicine member interest group, which she leads, and I help enthusiastically. It's this cool thing called the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. The American Medical Association has something called the Physician Innovation Network. It's worth checking out. Lots of companies who have cute ideas about how they're going to revolutionize healthcare need to collide with people on the front lines of healthcare to sort of disabuse them of their precious ideas about how they're going to fix everything with technology. There's great organizations in the direct primary care space. If that's a sort of a dimension you would want to introduce into your practice, if you want to sort of leave the insurance structure entirely behind and go full on telemedicine, that's great. If you're looking to rediscover your passion for medicine forwards, an emerging, exciting organization to follow. And then maybe we're just going to have to go start our own thing. For those of us who are interested in this concept of virtual primary care, there isn't any organization that's the obvious, oh, here's where you go for that, right? I think the AAP is doing a lot to explore that really cautiously, you have a lot of people in the academy who are still suspicious of the whole concept. So, maybe some other kind of organization should exist, and I don't know, maybe we should start it. But it's not there today. Next slide, please. Anyway, I want to leave you this concept. Like, seriously, don't try this at home. I want you to, if you are sincerely interested in this as an option to expand your professional satisfaction, super viable, it's super fun. If anybody wants to talk more about that, I really hope you'll email me, and we can work together on that. But the what could go wrong, there's a long list of things, right? If you still have a bunch of student debt, if your retirement savings, kids' college kind of future finances aren't well accounted for, do you have an emergency savings fund, significant personal savings to draw on while you get a new practice started? Do you have a working spouse or secondary household income that can help to help you to ride out some of the maybe ebbs and flows of starting a new business? Where are you going to get your health care during this whole process? If you have children, who will care for them while you're doing the telemedicine visits? And how much do you know already about entrepreneurship, health technology? And I happen to be unusual from the perspective that, due to my own sort of, luck and, white privilege and a variety of other factors, happen to have like a lot of these things just really well taken care of, that lets me go out and do all this risky stuff. So I don't recommend this for everybody. But I do think that these are solvable, these are tractable issues. They're things that you can plan for, that you can mitigate against. And you might decide, how the heck with it, I'm just going to take a risk, right? Because if it's between this and leaving the practice of medicine entirely, I think you would be well served to explore every option before you make that decision. And here's a viable one that maybe you hadn't considered before. So I think that may be one of my last slides. Let's see. Oh yeah, here's a manifesto. I think everybody needs a manifesto. So I'm looking over my shoulder. This hangs on my wall. I read it every day. Whatever your personal manifesto is, I hope that you can find some comfort in it. Some greater principles that you can kind of lean into and help you to find the courage to be, what is it Brene Brown says, to be awkward and brave and kind. Because if you're willing to try something out and to fail again and to fail better next time, that's how really beautiful, interesting things happen in this world, is when people take those risks. And every now and then, we accidentally get something right, and it can be really cool. And so that's the journey that I'm on, and I invite you to join me at any point in time. Happy to learn more about your journey and to help you on yours. And so you can contact me at my email address. You can find me on LinkedIn. And I really look forward to your questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much for just all the great information that's been shared tonight. And so if anyone has any questions, please share them in the the question and answer portion, and we will ask the panelists. I have a quick question I'd like to start off with. What do you feel like your biggest fear or challenge is in practicing telemedicine compared to practicing in a brick and mortar family medicine practice?
Is that for all of us, right?
Yes.
I don't think I have a fear. I have I miss holding babies. I have to say that is something that I haven't been able to find a substitute for, but I do have a lot of props when I see kids to engage them. It's a great question, because I've been asked this before, and I don't want to come off the wrong way when I say this, but I personally am really good at listening to people and looking at people, and I feel confident in the services I offer online, but I know when it's too much for me. So I guess a fear would be that I miss it, and I don't know when it is too much, but knock wood, that hasn't happened yet. I tend to be very conservative, and I'm very interactive with patients, which I think helps. The feedback I get is, patients think that they're, they know me because I always ask, what do you think about this? Do you understand what I'm saying? Are we clear on what to look for? And it's more of an exchange. And I'm in a unique situation than Dr. Joey or Julia because I don't know many of these people who come in and see me. So I need something that will make me feel confident that they get it. And I think that is a nuance with what I do in my, Amwell group, is that if I don't have that sense, those are the people I'm likely going to refer in. So I guess that would be my fear or my worry, but I feel pretty confident in what I can do.
I think in the short term, I feel fairly fearless. I mean, I don't. I think I had a lot more fear in brick and mortar practice just because, you've got things flying at you from multiple directions all day long. It's this sort of a chaotic community health center, primary care type practice that I came from. I don't have that anymore. I feel like I have better connections with my patients now than I did with all the distractions of sort of like a busy primary care office. And it's a balance, it's a trade-off. So I guess what I worry about is maybe in the longer term, whether our specialty is going to be a little bit hollowed out by this transformation. Because if we lean a little bit too hard into the virtual primary care sort of thing, and if an in-person practice stops being viable, I think that would be a negative. I think that I think then that's just a short drive down the road to where, I mean, why bother seeing a family physician at all? Because you've got the iPhones and the algorithms and the devices, and and I think so. I don't think it's likely to happen. I think that patients still want connection because they don't say, oh yeah, I go see Dr. Amwell or I go see Dr. Plushcare. I mean, they go see Dr. Finkelston, they go see Dr. Nichols, and they I think as long as humans want to have connections with other humans who, have that supportive, compassionate, healing touch, even if it's a digital touch. No, I mean, there's nothing really keeping me up at night, I guess. Well, not about telemedicine practice anyway. Plenty of other things keeping me up at night these days.
Yeah, I agree.
Excellent. And we got a couple more questions coming in. So a couple of these are for you, Dr. Nichols. So the first is, how do you start advertising to recruit patients to your new practice? And then do you bill insurance, or do you run a completely self-pay practice? Or do you have support staff, or need that with your telemedicine practice?
What fantastic questions. So first question, again, another thing that made what I'm doing possible was that, previously for doctors to know like how to market a practice across, I'm in 25 different states. If you have a degree in marketing maybe, and a lot of money to pay Google for search engine optimization, maybe you can make that work. But there is a growing number of companies, and I won't name them here, right? But that you can basically, it's like Open Table for restaurants, except for now for telemedicine visits. So you don't have to work for an Amwell or a Doc on Demand or a Plushcare or an MD Live to bring patients to you. There are newer services that are emerging that you can sign up for, and then you're on the menu, and people can pick you. And that's very, very, very new thing. And it remains to be seen how popular that's going to be. But that's what's allowed me to quickly scale up my practice, within a week of putting my name out there with as many licenses as I have. I was able to replace the income I was getting as a contracted employed type physician, like 1099 employed physician with like a major national telemedicine company. So that's how I find patients. Someone else solves that problem for me, and I partner with them. And I think the second, it was a question: do I take insurance? No, because you have to charge a whole lot more money to pay for your staff to bill for the insurance, as I'm sure you're aware. So a lot of, it was the national averages. Y'all would know better than me, but something like 3 full-time staff members to every physician just to process all the insurance paperwork. So by being direct to consumer, I can cover my practice costs with a super low overhead practice, with no advertising or marketing budget. Really, I can see patients for somewhere, but in the I don't know if I'm allowed to talk prices, but I mean it's very competitive for what they would pay to one of the national kind of companies that are in the telemedicine space, and actually more affordable in most cases for the cash paying patients, because I've cut out all the administrivia and the complexity and the billing and the long revenue cycles. And finally, do I have a support staff? No, and there are days I really want them. There are days I miss having, a team like I've had I've worked for 6 companies in the telemedicine space previously for various lengths of time. Like companies like Amwell and PlushCare and MD Live and I mean, I took it for granted all my years of practice, having somebody to do the scheduling and let me know when there was a problem with the prescription at the pharmacy and kind of cover me. And so when I kind of strapped myself to the hood of this practice and didn't have that administrative support, it was a little bit jarring. But thankfully, having a background in health technology, a lot of my basic practice, like the intake process and the billing and the communications, a lot of it's actually fairly well automated. So I think with the right technology and the right scope of practice, by thinking through that little cycle that I showed you on that slide, you can get to the point where you can minimize, maybe even eliminate completely your need for support staff. But if you just really like having all those things taken care of, I mean, I think that's an option too. And because I don't have to have an office and give people a place to sit and a refrigerator to store their lunch, you can hire a virtual medical assistant, to very affordably help to offload some of those tasks. They don't even have medical training necessarily. You can just hire a generic personal assistant to do sort of the scheduling and data entry and administration piece too. So I guess I'll throw it back to you. You can do all the things you want to do. It depends on how creative you are. Just be sure that you give your lawyer a chance to talk you out of it first.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I even in my practice, as I said, I wanted to be the one who would do some telemedicine visits, and our company was just not willing. The health system wasn't willing to send people my way. But I think depending on what your model is, perhaps your medical director is willing to have someone do telemedicine. And then, certain insurances do cover telemedicine visits. And more are adding that every day. So this is aside from the direct to consumer that Dr. Joey was talking about. But you can, carve that niche out in your practice if it works for you. I mean, I was hoping I could have done that, but it didn't work out for me.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question is for Dr. Jenkins. There's been a couple questions from people in the state of Florida. Is there any hope for us being able to see patients out of the state of Florida via telemedicine?
That's a really good question, and I don't have an answer yet. I think that we've been allowed to do a lot of things because of the pandemic, and we've been able to make a good argument that with people, patients that we have established relationships with, that it's reasonable to provide care, even if they're temporarily out of state, and to be there for them. And it's very difficult to travel nowadays because of needing testing and quarantined and all the different factors that go into that. I would encourage you again to really share that concern with your legislators, with the FAFP, and tell them your stories, because they are making those decisions now. And I think that there's legislation right now on out-of-state care and trying to support that. So if that's important to you and you think that's important to our patients, speak up, because those decisions are being made. And I think, as you're appreciating from the webinar today, things in the telehealth world are rapidly changing. So us physicians who know what's best for our patients and we're on the front lines, we really need to be very outspoken at this time and let payers know, let our legislators know, how do you appropriately utilize telemedicine and what should they be watching out for? One of the questions I saw was, there's a lot of companies looking to capitalize on remote patient monitoring and taking physicians out of the equation. And that may hurt our revenue and what we're able to get reimbursed in the future. And that's very possible if we don't have a voice and a seat at the table in this. So I really encourage you to be involved.
I think patients don't think about, I want my data to go up to some robot and that's going to be a good thing for me. I think when their data go anywhere, they just expect, oh yeah, Dr. Joey's looking at this. Mm-hmm. Even if the company never told them that, even if it's not introduced in the marketing materials, it's amazing that to me, that's the perception I see. The default is that, my doctor has access to all of my information wherever I might go and should know everything that's happening to me, even when I'm not here. because you all have electronic health records and stuff, right? So why am I telling you this? Like, what, why aren't you, why don't you already know these things? And you've probably seen that in your practices so far. I think the same attitude, is going to create a lot of disappointment in these early instances of RPM. I remember when my medical school started marketing itself as the medical school of personalized medicine. And one of the professors got a call from a patient one time and said, hey, can you explain to me what's this personalized medicine stuff? And the attending was like, well, I'm not really part of that, but I mean, what I think it means is that we use all this information from your genetics and your remote patient monitoring and data and stuff, and we use that to more individualize, the treatments that we're providing you, so you'll have better outcomes. And the patient's really disappointed. She said, oh, darn, I thought it meant that I'd have a doctor that finally listens to me.
A great story. So I've got one last question because we're closing up tonight, but this is going to be for all three. And there was questions about follow-up. So is there room for a type of hybrid practice where maybe you partner with brick and mortar practices where your patients could come in and get their vitals or be checked out? And then also, what is the follow-up for patients with continuity care? Do you send them do you just do urgent care? And then do you have to get a license in every state that you practice in?
Well, I'll start since I'm a little different than everyone else. Yes, I have to get a license in every state I practice in. So if you are in a state where I don't have a license and you want care, I cannot help you. Currently, at least that's what's going on. As far as follow-up, on an urgent care platform, the follow-up, is really, it really depends on the provider that's there. I mean, it's easy for me. I'm a full-time provider, so I can tell a patient, hey, I'm working in 3 days. Come and see me on this day at this time for follow-up. But we do have a lot of doctors who just come on when they want to see patients. And so they don't have that with our urgent care model. We do have a newer virtual primary care model which is with one insurance company. And with that, they can follow up with the same provider. If they need a referral, they can get a referral. If they need blood work, if they need studies, we can set that up. So again, this is growing. I think the message tonight from all of us has been things are changing pretty quickly. And the answer at the end of the year may be different than what I'm giving you right now. But the whole idea of seeing a patient in person and then following up online can happen. And I have worked with some groups who have added telemedicine services just for that purpose, especially with surgical follow-ups, et cetera. But I'll let Dr. Joey and Julia answer as well.
I'll speak very briefly because I'm interested to see what Dr. Joey's going to say, but I'm seeing this in our healthcare system and other healthcare systems where you partner with different organizations like pharmacists and different providers like pharmacists or other clinical staff where, for example, my healthcare system, Baycare, they have a relationship with Publix and their physicians provide the virtual care. And we have Tidacare and other devices that help gather the clinical data. But if you needed staff nearby, you can utilize assistants, pharmacists, clinical folks with different organizations to help enhance the information you're getting and to get that clinical data. So it doesn't have to be staff is my other point. If you have good peripherals, which I know Dr. Joey can speak to, you can get a lot of that clinical data and a lot of information without necessarily needing people, there. But yeah, I'll let him speak to that. I think he could speak more to that than I can.
No pressure, right? So I don't have a license in Florida, and yet I still see patients in Florida. Florida's a weird state, right? Because you have this out-of-state telemedicine registration kind of thing, which is pretty cool. And I love that because it really expanded access to patients in Florida, as a lot of the Florida practitioners were standing up their telemedicine practices and figuring that all. You're listening to Julia's webinar and you're doing the work. Folks like me who are a little bit ahead of the curve could come in and be helpful on a temporary basis. And then, what I'm finding though is I'm seeing a lot of patients who would much rather have their regular doctor, like they're disappointed that they have to come and see me, right? Because if Dr. Julia hadn't set up her telemedicine practice, they need a telemedicine visit or some kind of visit. There's no one to see. right, I'm a second best option. And they're very happy to tell me that, right, that they just can't wait until their regular doctor gets it together with his telemedicine stuff. So I want to emphasize that point. It's not like I'm coming for to eat your lunch. But I do think it would make sense to uncomplicate the process. I think I pay, no, somebody, not me, but I mean, it cost, was it $15,000 total to get my first sort of tranche of like 20 licenses were available at the time through IMLCC. They've expanded a little bit more. And I had a couple of licenses in the big states like California, New York, separately. But the point is, it's like it's a very significant expense to get all these licenses in these multiple states. And a lot of us could practice medicine. I don't think you have any different, I don't know, textbooks on medicine in Florida. I think the physiology is pretty much the same in Florida as it is in Maryland. So, I mean, there's a growing argument for like, are there other ways that we can protect patient safety and the public interest, you know, by being a little bit flexible and creative and imaginative and rethinking the licensing scheme. But in the meantime, yeah, you're the one state where like any doctor can pay $100 and see patients there and not need like the full licensing process. And then if anything goes wrong, you know, the Florida Board of Medicine will refer them to my primary board of Maryland for any further action. As far as partnering with brick and mortar practices, that's really cool. And I can think of, and I know somebody who's starting that company. So if you want to know more, you know, there's definitely a model for doctors like me or Dr. Mia to be like, oh, I really wish I could listen to your lungs or have someone do this exam maneuver or whatever. So why don't you go down the street to this brick and mortar place and have those data collected and I'll review them, right? But if they don't want to go to a place, because who wants to go anywhere? Anyway, that's not so different than going to a traditional doctor's visit. And oh my God, who loves that? There's this great other trend, and you mentioned Tita Care, Dr. Julia, and I know Dr. Mia has also been playing around with these devices. I certainly have looked at them closely and have kind of decided to just kind of develop my own box full of peripherals that I send to patients' homes. So if I really want to, it's like that Apple commercial, if I want to take an EKG, I'll take an EKG, right? That's what I'm doing. I've got the little stick of chewing gum size 6-lead EKG thing that I can walk patients through over a tablet and collect all the data that I'd want to have. I actually think I do better physical exams using these peripherals because they're very fancy, right? And I can't, you know, and it takes me 30 seconds to get a 6-lead EKG. It takes me about 2 minutes to get pulmonary function tests. You know, I have a body composition scanner that gives me really detailed information about a patient's, you know, kind of metabolic status that I can get a reading on in under 2 minutes. And I never had those data available at my fingertips, you know, and in my previous primary care practice, or it was more cumbersome. And I actually tried out the latest iteration of my peripheral box this morning. And the person who was kind enough to be like my test patient, I have to admit to you, there was a software update last night and I didn't double check everything. And so the entire thing epically failed. Like literally everything went wrong, right? And still, despite the fact that there were like myriad technical failures and problems, and I was getting a little frustrated, my test patient told me it was still the most fun she'd ever had at a doctor's visit, right? So when we actually get the technology nailed down, you know, and you give these really cool gadgets to patients to do their own exam and get really engaged, and I'm hearing my own heart sounds along with you, and I'm seeing my EKG waveform, and we're talking about it in real time, right? Opens up really new possibilities for engaging our patients in their healthcare. And it sort of gets them used to this idea, trains them with this idea that, you know, one of these days, not so very long, you're going to be wearing these things on your wrist, right? And those data aren't going to be going to the robot in the sky. They're going to be going to Dr. Jenkins.
Yeah,
right?
and I wanted to comment that it's already being done and it's been done for years. So neurologists that wanted to reach rural areas and assess people with a possible stroke, you know, the patient would go to the rural hospital and the specialist, the neurologist would assess via telemedicine. So this is not a new concept. I think it's newer to us in the primary care space. Home health services are definitely embracing that concept where they have someone go out to the home and, you know, download the data from the data hub and then help the patient at home connect on the laptop who might have difficulty with technology with their provider. So this is already being done and we can definitely do a lot more and help it expand.
Yeah, no, that innovation definitely rhymes with plagiarism.
Excellent. Well, appreciate just amazing ideas tonight. There's some just, I think everyone who's been on this webinar really is probably just sitting there and a whole new world has opened up. And so it's just incredible to think where we've come in the past year. And so I'm going to let, just before we finish up, I'm going to let Dr. Jenkins, do you want to just say a little bit about the upcoming forum?
I absolutely will. So those of us in the FAFP that are members of our continuing professional development committee, we're very excited about our upcoming spring hybrid forum, April 16th through 18th. I would really encourage all of you to take a look at that. We're excited not about our topics and of course about our speakers. Just to give you a little sneak peek, we're going to talk about virtual musculoskeletal examination for those of you interested in telemedicine. We're also going to talk about dive medicine, new technology in primary care, social determinants of health, which I think we can all appreciate the importance of that. We're going to get an amazing update from Dr. Van Dermy on COVID-19, and then bread and butter family medicine. We're going to talk about asthma, diabetes, and hyperlipidemia. So definitely would be added value participating in that. I hope to see you guys there.
Excellent, thank you. And just again, I just want to tell just our presenters tonight, just thank you. This was really just an amazing presentation. Just really thinking about just how far everything has come since last March. And it's really great to see some of the amazing work that's being done to reach our patients and to keep pushing family medicine forward. So I just want to thank the three of you for spending this evening with us and sharing just all this great information. And so just want to thank everybody for attending tonight, and don't forget to continue to visit the FAFP website, fafp.org, for late-breaking information concerning the COVID-19 pandemic and to listen to any of our past webinars. As always, we appreciate the work all of you are doing as family physicians on behalf of your patients in Florida and across the country. Until we connect again, good night, be well, and stay safe. And again, just want to thank Dr. Jenkins, Dr. Finkelston, Dr. Nichols, just for just an incredible presentation tonight. We really appreciate you spending this time with us.
Like the Brady Bunch. Bye.
Exactly.
Bye.
Thanks, Julia. Bye, Joey.